The decision was final. Bruce Lee had been disqualified. The referee's voice carried across the arena. Some people clapped. Most didn't. The arena wasn't enormous, but it was full. A few thousand seats arranged in tight rows around a raised square platform. Fluorescent lights hung from a steel ceiling. Banners from local sponsors draped across the upper railings. Officials sat behind long folding tables at the edge of the mat, clipboards stacked neatly, pens aligned, expressions practiced. It had started as a technical exhibition tournament, controlled contact, strict time limits, clearly defined rules about grip, distance, and prohibited follow-ups. The crowd expected precision. They expected speed. They expected something efficient. The exchange that changed everything lasted less than a second. A forward entry, a short strike, a continuation half a beat beyond the referee's call. The whistle cut through the noise. Most people assumed it was a warning. The referee stepped in. Bruce Lee stepped back immediately. No resistance. The officials leaned together. Quiet conversation. One of them pointed at a line on the rule sheet. The microphone clicked on. Contestant Lee is disqualified for violation of contact protocol. Excess continuation after call. The words were even, procedural, no emotion in them. Bruce Lee stood still in the center of the platform. He didn't move right away. He didn't look confused. He didn't look angry. He just stood there, breathing slowly, eyes steady, posture straight. His hands were relaxed at his sides. Not tight, not shaking, just still. For a brief moment, the whole arena felt paused. You could hear small sounds that were hidden before. A cough from the upper row, a program paper folding, the hum of the overhead lights. It felt almost unreal, like time had slowed down. The opponent took a small step back. He looked toward the referee first, then toward the officials' table, as if making sure the decision was real. It was. Bruce Lee turned his head slightly toward the referee. Their eyes met for less than a second. No glare, no question, just acknowledgement. Then he gave a small nod. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple. That nod changed the air. If he had thrown his gloves down, people would have reacted fast. If he had argued loudly, the crowd would have chosen sides. But he did none of that. He stayed calm. The referee lowered his arm and stepped away. The opponent shifted awkwardly, unsure how much emotion he was allowed to show. A few people near the front clapped again, short and polite. The sound died quickly. Most people were not clapping. They were watching. Some leaned forward in their seats. Others crossed their arms. A man in the third row shook his head slowly, not in anger, just disbelief. A young boy near the aisle looked at his father and whispered something. The father didn't answer. He was still looking at the platform. Bruce Lee adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. A small movement. Normal, controlled. He didn't rush. He didn't stall either. He just remained present. The official at the table marked something on a sheet of paper. Another adjusted his glasses. The microphone was turned off with a soft click. The routine continued, as if nothing unusual had happened. But something had. The crowd had come expecting action, a display of skill, maybe even dominance. Instead, they were watching something quieter, something harder to explain. Composure. Bruce Lee took one step back from the center, then another. His face showed no sign of frustration, no tight jaw, no fast breathing, just balance. The arena lights reflected off the polished surface of the platform. The space suddenly felt bigger than before. He had been disqualified. The rule had been applied. The result was official. But the feeling in the room didn't match the announcement. People weren't reacting to the rule. They were reacting to the silence. And in that silence, something invisible began to shift. He did not look surprised. He did not look offended. He did not look toward the crowd. He looked at the referee, gave a small nod, and lowered his hands. His opponent shifted his weight slightly, unsure whether to celebrate. A few polite claps surfaced from the lower rows. They did not spread. Most people remained seated. There was no immediate outrage, just confusion, a flattening of sound. Conversations began quietly. A man leaned toward the woman beside him and whispered something. She kept watching the platform. The winner's hand was raised. Applause followed. Thin, incomplete. Bruce Lee adjusted his sleeve calmly. He bowed briefly toward the officials and stepped off the platform when signaled. No hesitation, no protest, no request for explanation. Silence began to feel heavier than noise. He moved toward the edge of the platform with the same steady pace he had used before the decision. His steps were not fast, not slow, just even. He did not look down. He did not look up into the lights. His eyes stayed level, focused somewhere neutral in front of him. The opponent remained in the center a moment longer. His arm was still half raised, then slowly lowered. He glanced at the crowd, searching for a reaction that didn't fully come. The applause ended before it could become confident. One official gestured toward the exit area. Bruce Lee inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. It was subtle, almost easy to miss. A camera flash went off from somewhere near the back. Then another. But the flashes felt out of rhythm, as if the photographers were unsure what moment they were capturing. A few rows up, someone began clapping again. Not loudly, just 3 or 4 steady claps. It stopped when no one joined in. People weren't angry. They were unsettled. The announcer cleared his throat and tried to move the program forward. His voice sounded formal, almost too formal. He thanked the contestants. He mentioned the next bracket. The words filled the speakers, but they didn't fill the room. Bruce Lee reached the stairs of the platform and stepped down carefully. One hand briefly touched the rope for balance. It was an ordinary movement, but it felt important because of how ordinary it was. No dramatic exit, no visible tension in his shoulders, no attempt to explain himself to anyone nearby. A man at ringside leaned forward slightly, as if expecting a reaction. There wasn't one. Bruce Lee stopped for a second, near the boundary line. A staff member said something quietly to him. He listened. He nodded again. The exchange was short, professional. In the audience, a woman crossed her arms tightly. A teenager in the front row kept looking from Bruce Lee to the officials' table, back and forth, as if trying to understand what had just happened. The platform now felt strangely empty, even though 2 people were still standing on it. Bruce Lee began walking toward the corridor that led backstage. The path was narrow, lined with temporary barriers. Security staff stood at even intervals, watching both the crowd and the exit. As he walked, heads turned, not dramatically, just naturally. People followed him with their eyes. There was something about the calm that held attention. It wasn't defiance, it wasn't pride, it was control. The applause for the winner did not restart. Instead, the room settled into a low hum of thought. Small conversations, short sentences, unfinished opinions. Bruce Lee did not speed up. He did not slow down. He simply continued forward. And the more he said nothing, the more the arena seemed to feel it. By the time he reached the middle of the aisle, the sound in the arena had changed again. It wasn't louder, it wasn't quieter, it was tighter. Conversations were happening, but they were short. People spoke in low tones, then stopped. It felt like the room was thinking. A few spectators near the back stood up halfway, then sat down again. Not to leave, just restless, unsure. The winner was still on the platform. Officials were speaking to him now, explaining the next round, adjusting the bracket. The structure of the event was moving forward, exactly as planned. But the attention wasn't. Most eyes were still on Bruce Lee. He paused briefly near the edge of the corridor. A staff member held the curtain open. He stopped for a second, not dramatically, just to allow someone carrying equipment to pass. Even that small courtesy was noticeable. He stepped aside, waited, then continued. No rush, no frustration in his walk. A man in the fourth row shook his head again, this time slower, not in anger, more like something didn't sit right. A woman beside him whispered, "It felt strict." He nodded once. Maybe too strict. No one was shouting. There was no wave of protest, but there was agreement spreading quietly. Near the front, a young boy stood on his seat slightly to keep Bruce Lee in view as he moved farther away. The boy's father gently pulled him back down, but even the father kept watching. On the platform, the announcer repeated the decision once more, just to confirm it for the record. His tone stayed professional. The rule had been applied correctly. The continuation after the whistle was measurable, technical. Still, the crowd didn't respond. Applause should have filled the gap by now. It didn't. Instead, a few soft boos came from somewhere high in the stands, not aggressive, almost hesitant. They faded quickly. No one picked them up. Bruce Lee reached the curtain. He stopped one last time and turned slightly, not toward the crowd directly, but toward the platform. He gave a small bow. It wasn't for sympathy. It wasn't for attention. It was simple respect. Then he stepped through. The curtain closed behind him. For a moment, the arena felt empty, even though it was full. The winner remained visible. The officials remained in control. The next match was being prepared. But something had shifted. People were no longer reacting to what was happening. They were reacting to what had just happened. A quiet resistance formed, not loud enough to be called protest, but strong enough to be felt. Some crossed their arms. Some leaned back and stared at the platform with narrowed eyes. Others stayed forward in their seats, thoughtful. No one rushed to the exits. No one celebrated loudly. The result was official. The paperwork would reflect it. But the emotional balance in the room had tilted. He had walked away without saying a word. And somehow, that silence was louder than any argument could have been. The next match was called forward. Two new competitors stepped onto the platform. They bowed. The referee gave instructions. The routine continued as if nothing had interrupted it. But the energy was different. The strikes in the new match sounded sharper than usual. Every movement echoed a little longer in the quiet. The crowd reacted, but the reactions were delayed, almost automatic. A clap here, a short cheer there. It didn't carry. People were still looking toward the corridor. A few seats creaked as spectators shifted uncomfortably. Someone near the aisle checked the program again, even though they already knew what it said. A man folded his arms and stared at the platform without expression. The officials kept their heads down. Pens moved. Scores were recorded. They did their jobs carefully, maybe more carefully than before. No one was arguing. No one was shouting. But no one had fully accepted it either. Around the 4-minute mark, a small wave of applause started again. Not for a strike, not for a point. Just applause, scattered and uneven. It wasn't directed clearly at anyone. It felt like acknowledgement. The sound grew slightly, then faded. It wasn't loud enough to be called support. It wasn't quiet enough to ignore. On the platform, one of the officials adjusted the microphone stand, even though it didn't need adjusting. Another leaned back in his chair and looked briefly toward the corridor before quickly returning to his notes. They felt it too. The match in progress continued. Techniques were clean, movements were correct, but the crowd's eyes wandered. Some were no longer watching the platform. They were replaying the moment in their minds. The whistle, the announcement, the nod. A woman near the front leaned forward and said quietly to the man beside her, "He didn't complain." The man replied, "That's why it feels different." No excitement rose in response to the ongoing bout. The rhythm of the event had been disrupted, not by noise, but by restraint. When the current match ended, the applause was polite, controlled, almost careful. The referee raised another hand. Another winner declared. The words passed through the speakers without weight. Still, no one left. That was the quiet reversal. Normally, A controversial call drains interest. People disengage. They step out for air. They head toward concessions. Here, the seats remained filled. The attention had shifted from competition to character. Even in absence, Bruce Lee held the focus of the room. Near the exit corridor, a security guard glanced back once more, as if expecting someone to return. No one did. The arena did not explode. It did not divide. It settled into something quieter, something thoughtful. The structure of the tournament stayed intact, but the atmosphere no longer belonged to the bracket. It belonged to the moment that had just passed. The tournament moved forward. Names were announced. Scores were recorded. Another round began. The structure held. The rules were still the same. Nothing official had changed. But the room had. The reactions were slower now. Applause came late and ended early. Even when a clean technique landed, the sound that followed felt automatic. People clapped because that's what they were supposed to do, not because they felt it. A man near the back leaned toward his friend and spoke quietly. He could have argued. His friend replied, "Yes." Neither of them added anything more. That was enough. Across the arena, heads still turned toward the corridor from time to time, not expecting him to return, just remembering the way he left. No anger, no explanation, no defense, just a nod. The officials continued working carefully. One of them avoided looking at the audience for too long. Another cleared his throat before every announcement, as if aware the room was listening differently now. The winner of the previous match had already disappeared backstage. No one followed him with their eyes. No one discussed his victory. They discussed the disqualification. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. A woman in the front row folded her program neatly and placed it on her lap. She kept staring at the platform, but her expression had changed. It wasn't frustration. It was reflection. The emotional balance of the night had shifted away from competition. It had settled on composure. Bruce Lee had lost officially. The rule had been applied. The record would show it clearly, disqualified. But in the quiet way, the audience remained seated, in the way applause never fully returned, in the way conversation stayed focused on his response. Instead of the result, something else had been decided. No one declared it. No one voted on it. It just formed. He did not resist. So the crowd resisted silently for him, not with shouting, not with protest, just with attention. Near the end of the event, the seats were still filled. The energy never returned to its earlier rhythm. It stayed tight, controlled, thoughtful. When the final match concluded, people stood slowly, not rushed, not energized. They walked toward the exits in measured steps, still talking quietly. Outside the arena, under the nightlights, small groups paused to finish their conversations. Some mentioned the rule, others mentioned the nod. Very few mentioned the winner. The result didn't change. The officials did their job. The bracket advanced, but the room remembered something else. He had been disqualified. He had accepted it. And somehow, that calm acceptance stayed longer than the announcement itself. The result was final, but the feeling